For this video, we'll go through a selection of Photoshop blend modes and effects, most often used to get the desired effect with the greatest confidence. Throughout the process of creating elevation files, it's important to remember this is an organic process where experimentation beyond the basics will have breakthrough moments. So take these techniques as a jumping off point on the journey to create elevated prints. This image of a brick wall will be the example artwork that needs an elevated element. To start with, create a new canvas in Photoshop that is grayscale and 16-bit. Copy and paste the color image here to see what the gray values give us to work with. In this case, the cracked paint could be used as a subtle effect. The bricks themselves don't have enough volume, so that will be the focus for today. Next, invert the image, which will make the lower dark areas, the shadows, lighter. This is a good starting point to begin elevating the bricks and lowering the grout. In some cases, it's important to edit out lighting effects like the shadow and highlight here. In this case, it's subtle enough to leave it for now, as it can be dodged out later if it proves to be an issue. The current sharpness of the image, when converted to a point cloud preview, shows many areas of high contrast in the details, and therefore noise or walls in the final print. A best practice is to do a small Gaussian blur at 1 pixel to remove their hard edges and rely on just a color image to render those fine details. This will reduce the chances of unwanted anomalies overall. This grid of bricks will have new high areas added here, so the current darkest elements of this image need to be lightened with a levels adjustment layer, which will later create a veneer of flaked paint. This will be layered on top of the new rectangle volume, which can be further adjusted later, but for now it's ready to go for the new elements. Here's the layout of elements we will use to generate these elevated brick shapes. All these items, including the rectangles, curves, and drawn images, will have the same layer blending mode. The curves and face are here to demonstrate how organic elements are affected. The rectangles are where we will focus for this technique. By default, gradients generated in Photoshop are not linear, and therefore curved in terms of the geometric surface generated when printed. The distribution of gray tones along the gradient is not even or linear. In this case, we are lifting what is essentially a flat brick surface, so we will need that surface to stay flat, rather than having a curve applied. To create this flat geometric surface, avoid using the method labeled linear, despite it seemingly being the logical choice. Instead, use the classic method and adjust the smoothness slider to 0. That will produce the flat surface often referred to as linear here. With these high contrast areas at the edges, we'll get walls here and here, but that will elevate like this. So the first thing to do is blur the edges. These elements are defined with masks, so it's simple to dial in a specific amount of feather in the mask properties to achieve the needed soft edges. Otherwise, it means using a Gaussian blur on a rasterized layer to get a similar effect. The edge of the bricks are feathered at 7 pixels. Nine for the curve, and 15 for the Egyptian portrait. This results in all the edges blending down to the base layer, while reducing the chance of walls on each. These are personal preferences based on the effect wanted while taking into account avoiding problems. At this stage, experiment to see what works best with your project. To blend the gradients and the grayscale version of the color image, the gradient layers are set to 50% as the baseline blending of layers, producing the combination tones and gray values. The outcome of this technique darkens light tones and lightens dark tones, resulting in an overall lower contrast. This is okay at the refinement stage, but at some point an adjustment is needed to produce a full black to white gradient within the entire image. For example, you can simply add a levels adjustment layer at the top and boost the darkness and lightness areas back to 100% black and 0% white. An adjustment layer will also affect the background subtle details here, so you'll need to adjust the second levels adjustment to lower, that is lighten, this veneer of cracked paint details that rests on the gradient elevation. Use a color sampler tool to make sure not to clip the darks too far, resulting in flat plateau areas in the grayscale and resulting print. Here we have the same layout as before, but with each layer's blend mode set to multiply. This utilizes the darkest tones of this layer and affects more of the underlying dark tones. The result is lower contrast, but more opaque values in the darks and no brightening from the pale tones. This mode will protect your lighter gray values from changes, whereas a normal blend mode will lighten those lighter gray values. Think of it like protecting the existing lighter tones and only replace or adjust the darker tones. With the layer transparency at 100%, we've removed all the cracked paint detail at the top of the gradient, as these are the darkest pixels. This can be added back in by adjusting the opacity of the layer to restore some of the detail in the darkest areas as needed. Here, it's subtle but clear that the cracked paint is less intense in the dark portion on the multiply example versus the normal. It's all about the effect needed. So, as we've seen, layer blend modes can isolate an effect or target certain areas without having to paint customized adjustments. Care is needed to avoid unwanted walls being generated with any process. Often the solution is to add an outer or inner glow layer effect to smoothly transition from the current layer to those surrounding it. This will blend elements with non-destructive pixels and can be adjusted and tuned without the need for custom painting. For the bricks, in this case, all we need is the mask shape, but on a white layer. Apply an inner glow here with the color set to black. This generates a soft, high-centered glow for the brick shape as though very rounded and weathered by time. Make sure to adjust the mask feather to soften these edges. We'll use this black box to show one issue to watch for with outer glow. The precise option in settings for the glow will create sharp corners, which isn't always wanted. But changing to soften will not hold onto those corners and visible edges will result. A soft edge mask can fix this, but won't always be an option, so keep this in mind when using glows. You can see the issue here in the point cloud preview, the precise area here and the soft area here. Combining feathered edges with an outer glow is the quickest way to blend elements together with a soft effect. An inner glow on a brick shape, combined with feathering and normal blend mode, can quickly create volume. With these gradients set to 75%, the cracked paint detail layer will distribute a thin veneer of cracked paint on top of the now rounded brick volume. Despite the literal layer order, these details will build up on top of the gradient tones. The final effect shows some flattening of the fine details around the head and curve due to this outer glow. This would be a good way to accentuate the main subject by gradually reducing the surrounding details. The curved bricks may not look as expected with a soft glow, but it's simple enough to layer in coarse noise or other elements depending on the style needed. All the previous examples were bumping up a surface, but what about carving into the surface? For this example, we are instead presuming that the base image is the highest point, and the changes we're going to make will cut into the surface. Therefore, the darkest point will be on those flakes of paint on the bricks. Apply a levels adjustment and shift all pixels to the darkest values. It's a good idea to mark the darkest pixel with the color sampler tool. Watch this reported value to make sure you don't clip the blacks. This is now our base level tone. Quite elevated, depending on the print height anyway. Screen mode makes use of the current layer's paler tones to lighten the tones below. In this case, the paler values are placed on top of this brick base, which in elevation terms lightens, or lowers, those tones while maintaining the details. The resulting effect cuts all these shapes into the elevated surface. Here's a collection of all the techniques combined, demonstrating their respective effects and how they play off one another. With the creative use of these and other techniques, there's amazing potential to bring a whole new dimension to your work. Not only can you elevate and accentuate the composition, but the effect is dynamic. As the viewer changes their physical viewing angle, light will catch different surfaces and planes, further bringing life to the story of the image. Take note that these and all previous examples have been elevated to 4 millimeters, which is quite extreme. This is simply to make the errors more obvious so as to demonstrate what to avoid. These walls here will show some darkening due to the vertical surface here not being rounded enough to eliminate it completely at 4 millimeters. It's about balancing the need for a logical corner edge of a known surface like this brick versus a clean elevation. Compromise is needed when going to higher elevations. Key to remember is it's about experimentation and discovery. It's a short path to finding that eureka moment. After that, developing your images will come together quickly. For further tips and techniques, check out more videos in this series.